Welcome, everyone, to the fifth in our series of trends in workplace technology and infrastructure as a result of our emerging technologies research study for 2022-2023. I'm Jerry Murphy, Senior Vice President of Research and Consulting at Nemertes. And this time, we're going to be talking a little bit about infrastructure and workplace technology. As a reminder for those of you who weren't here before, this is a high-level survey where we talked to 20 firms that were in 10 vertical industries. These were large companies we talked to about their rates of technology adoption across different areas. We were really looking at benchmarking the adoption of key, what we call bellwether technologies across organizations and their level of maturity and being prepared to use these new technologies. This was done via live interviews with people a couple months ago. As you can see here on the right side, we looked at 10 broad areas, and what we're focusing on today are the details of the findings in workplace technology and infrastructure. Our definitions of workplace technology are technologies that enable workers to become more productive. Things like virtual office spaces, AI-generated content, avatar management, things of that nature. Infrastructure, we mean the behind-the-scenes technologies keeping enterprises up and running. So this is the network, servers, storage, virtual machines, things along those lines. Bellwether technologies are technologies that we picked as being representative of emerging technologies in these different areas. By no means was this a comprehensive list of all technologies, but we picked anywhere from 3 to 8 technologies in these particular areas, just to give us a quick and dirty sense of where people are in adopting these different technologies. All right. Some of the ways we assessed maturity was sort of in 3 broad areas. One is technology state of adoption. That is, where is the company in terms of actually adopting that particular technology? Are they considering it? Are they currently using it? Is there money budgeted for it this year, next year, that kind of thing? Realized value of technology is we asked people, regardless of whether they're using the technology, what's the perceived value of that technology to their business? And then the next 7 or 8 really relate to the people and processes. Do you have things like key performance indicators? Do you have training? Do you have budget? Do you have plans for governance of that technology? Is this technology integrated into your overall operations environment, that kind of thing? What are some of the key findings that we found specifically for workplace technology infrastructure? Amazingly, this is a little bit surprising to me, was workplace technology is largely reactive. And while people talk about the importance of our workers, the reality is when we ask people where their budgets, where their plans, how are you integrating technology, it seemed to be much more we're applying technology, we're applying money to workplace when we have to, as opposed to we're methodically planning on how to look at next generation technology to improve employees' technology. There certainly was a good increase in using artificial intelligence for workplace automation. So we certainly did see that. We also saw that virtual reality is pretty much universal. Now, by that, I would say basic virtual reality. So things like what we're doing right now, things like, Zoom, using web cameras and integrating that with collaboration so that I can share a presentation like we're doing now. Things like the metaverse, where I have an avatar and I'm putting on goggles and I'm actually in some virtual reality environment that is like a new reality. That seems to be much further off. There are people that are poking in that a little bit, especially in sort of like the publishing, media, entertainment world. But for a lot of people, that's quite a ways off. Infrastructure, as I talk to people, seems to be what I'd call table stakes. Certainly people need infrastructure and it's a basis for their operation. You have to have, you know, network connectivity. Now, do we need to have servers? There certainly needs to be servers, but maybe they're more housed at somebody else's area or we're using somebody else's application. But it certainly is a fundamental part of what people do to run their businesses. One of the big issues around infrastructure really seems to be with people. Am I leasing infrastructure via XaaS, whether that's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, versus building and writing it myself? And software-defined networking is certainly being broadly adopted, where it used to be people would design their own networks. More and more, we're seeing people really look very closely and embracing the use of software-defined networking, using a basic public internet, but then having some kind of encrypted technology to allow me to manage a bunch of users wherever they may be. Now, when you look at our maturity model, for those of you who haven't done this before, I'm just going to sort of quickly revisit this. We assessed people broadly in 3 areas when we looked at companies' maturity in adopting technology. The level 0 would be they're unprepared. People do not have the necessary information to take effective action. They're literally caught flat-footed and don't know how to respond to new technology environments. Reactive is people have basic platforms and structures, but they're literally putting them in place as they need them when they happen. Proactive is people are having platforms in place. They're thinking about it, but they're thinking about it in terms of my issues today, not necessarily my issues tomorrow. And anticipatory is the highest level of maturity, where I have platforms today, but I'm actually thinking about my processes, about how technology is going to be transforming my company, by my business and processes in the future. And I'm actively planning for what technology is going to do for me tomorrow, not just today. Now, when we looked across workplace technology and infrastructure, as you can see, pretty much across the board, there were areas across there. I was a little surprised at how many people are really unprepared for workplace. And like I said, I see a lot of people are very much reacting to what they need to do as it happens. And you really saw this with the pandemic, where a lot of people were kind of caught flat-footed on how do I need to let my person from home get access to company systems. And a lot of people had to sort of jump through hoops to do that. Infrastructure, a little less, but again, it's people looking at infrastructure as sort of the basic plumbing of my environment, but they're not necessarily looking proactively at new technologies and how new infrastructure technologies are going to be used, like 5th-generation wireless as a replacement for my LANs or things of that nature. Now, to drill down into the details of workplace technology, these are the areas we looked at. We looked at 7 different areas: AI-assisted task automation, AI-generated content, virtual reality collaboration, virtual office / enterprise metaverse. Now, from my perspective, those 2 things are maybe significantly different. Employee experience management, enterprise avatar management, and virtual event platforms. So these are the areas of specific workplace technology we asked people of how they were using them. And this is sort of where we see the findings across the board. As far as adopting technology, again, a full 30% of the people were just unprepared for using a lot of this new technology. Now, it's important to note, when you look at these different areas, lots of people were using, say, virtual reality and collaboration, but really not almost anybody was using, say, like enterprise avatar management or virtual office, enterprise metaverse, or maybe even virtual event platforms. So it doesn't mean across the board they're unprepared, but there are certainly you did not see people rapidly embracing all of those different areas. In fact, when you look at anticipatory, where part of our criteria is, you have to be using, 80% of those technologies, really a relatively small number of people were sort of embracing all of those different things. In terms of the realized value of the technology, what I find is a similar thing. People definitely see the value of things like Zoom, virtual meetings, virtual collaboration. People are very much struggling to see the value of the metaverse as you're looking at it in terms of like the matrix, that I'm literally embedding myself completely in a new environment. People aren't necessarily seeing values of things like that. Now you look in terms of teams specializing in it, 70% of people have teams there. But again, that's teams specifically around things like virtual collaboration and things like Zoom meetings, not necessarily having teams that are focused on metaverse itself. Line items in budget. People do have line items in the budget. A lot of times for some of the technology, it's really in the budget for this year if I haven't deployed it, or it's in the budget for next year, as opposed to not thinking about it at all. And people are largely, as you can see here, largely sort of reactive in terms of training programs, integrating the strategy more towards the future. Now, again, you can see people look like they're anticipatory, but that's with respect to things like Zoom that they might be using today. Some of the comments that we got from people are debating how standardized you can get. The interesting thing about when you look at some of these technologies are, I can have an infrastructure for one of these things, but not necessarily a bunch of them. A lot of people, for example, are going to, Office 365 for virtual collaboration. But then the question is, where do I standardize all the different things? A lot of people clearly were home last couple of years. In the case of education business, people really, we're doing pretty good for doing remote education. A lot of faculty actually were already set up for doing online. And then when the pandemic came, it just became something more full-time. It was more gearing up to scale as opposed to we didn't have an ability to do that. But when it comes to things like avatars and Second Life, people really aren't doing that kind of thing for the most part. When you look at specific areas, AI-assisted task automation, about half the people are evaluating it. A quarter of the people really either have considered rejected or not using. Only about 25% of the people are using it right now. Although it's interesting, while you only have 23% using, 60% of the people are seeing value in assisted task automation, even though only 23% are using it. When it comes to AI-generated content, 31% using it there. Somewhat less in terms of what the perceived value is. Interesting there, 30% of people don't really know what the value of AI-generated content. And I think until you see some of these things happening, it's hard to understand what the value might be for some of these technologies. For VR collaboration, perceived value, about half of the people either using it, some people not knowing and evaluating. But generally, people are seeing the value around things like collaboration. Metaverse, and again, virtual office versus enterprise metaverse. When I see this using now, that's really more like virtual office, and that's things like Microsoft Teams more than it is what you or I might actually consider a metaverse in the lines of something like the Matrix. Certainly, the vast majority of people are seeing a perceived value there. But again, the value is more around things like, Microsoft Teams more than it is the metaverse itself. Employee experience management, about half the people are using it. More than half think there's generally value for employee experience management. And I think management sees the value of it. The question is, how much do I want to spend in terms of staffing on that, spending money in technology and training? Not that there's not value there. I think people would like to have it to be a little bit more easier to use and cost less before they're going to jump on board of it, beyond the half that are doing it today. Avatar management, you can see here, it's interesting. People are saying they see value there, but 46% of the people not considering, don't know whether they're going to use it. Very small amount of people are actually using it. So it's interesting to see, to me, while there's perceived value, vast majority of the people, a good significant people, don't know if they're going to use or have looked at it and are not considering it. So to me, that's kind of confusing how they perceive value, even though many people have said they're not going to use it. Virtual event platforms, a lot of people using those right now. 25% not considering. And I think that depends on the types of businesses that are looking at doing that kind of thing. If you look at it, for the people who are using it or evaluating it, they've seen the value there. But if you look at the 23% not considering, that kind of lines up with they don't understand the value, or there's some value there, but the people who are not considering it, there is about 25% of the people out there that are questioning the value of that. When it comes to having teams specializing in it, there are about 75% that do have the teams. They do have defined use cases for the technology. Only about half have KPIs in place, but 75% have governance. People do have budgets. And again, if you looked at those 7 areas, this is just in general having budgets. That doesn't mean 85% of the people have budgets for avatars and for metaverses, but in general, for workplace technology, they have budgets and they have training for the things that they're using. Operations, similarly, 77% have operations and have strategies for integrating for the technologies that they've determined to use, not all of them. And they have strategies for integrating it for the next couple of years. What are some of the use cases? Really see here, it's the balance between office workplace and out of office. So as you got more and more people working from home, and it seems to me right now, people are at about anywhere from 30 to 50%, where a lot of people seem to be, you can work from home sometime. There's some percentage of the population that can work remotely all the time, but it seems like a lot of companies have the policy where, we would like you to be into work 2 to 3 days a week, and you can work from home for 2 to 3. People are still sorting through how they're going to do that. And then how do I separate work-life balance is one of the challenges there people are trying to get right. I think that's one of the reasons you see some of the people, part of their balance is, have you at work sometime, as opposed to just figure out the balance and be 100% remote. I see fewer people really going 100% remote. Our company is doing that. There are companies doing that. But if I look at a lot of across most industries today are not concluding everybody's going to work remotely. On the infrastructure side, we had 8 different things we were looking at here: software-defined networking, high-performance computing, infrastructure as code, software-defined LANs, software-defined WANs, quantum computing, neuromorphic computing, nano computing, swarm computing, low Earth orbit satellites. So there are some of these areas people are really embracing a lot, like software-defined networking, SD-WAN, SD-LAN, not necessarily so much on quantum computing, nano computing technologies. When you look here, you can see a lot of maturity when it comes to teams, defined use case, and what I would call the people in the process part. And I think that's largely because if you look at infrastructure generally, every company has people that are doing networking, people that are doing security, people that are doing storage, all of those types of things. So they have teams in place, and how much of that is incremental as opposed to I've got a team that's leaning into future technology. When you look at the state of adoption, that's where you see people aren't embracing all of those technologies, but certainly what somebody would call the bread and butter technologies, they're certainly on top of those. These are some of the comments we got from people. They're seeing infrastructure being legacy over time. And there definitely is this sort of macro shift from me owning and operating my own data center, my own server, my own storage, my own networks to I've got software as a service that I'm getting from, PeopleSoft. I've got somebody else doing my HR accounting software. I got ADP doing my direct deposits into the bank for people. I've got somebody else doing this and that. And my job is stitching all of that stuff together to make sure that my business processes are working properly. The big challenge people are looking at is what do I own versus what do I lease? And on the software side, you're definitely seeing a trend for I bought an app, I'm installing the app in my data center. Perfect example is Exchange, right? You look at Microsoft Exchange, I bought it, I put it on a server in my data center. Almost everybody's migrating to going to Azure. I'm getting Office 365, and Microsoft loves it because now I get this annual guaranteed revenue stream that you're paying me every single year, every single month for using this application. And you're seeing the trends on other areas. Clearly, I pay for things like networking that way, right? I'm paying Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, CenturyLink, these people. I'm paying them per month for my network connectivity. And now the question is, am I going to start leasing my network routers? Am I leasing storage from AWS and so on and so on? So you're seeing it going from a CapEx model that I depreciate to almost all of my infrastructure is becoming monthly OpEx, right? You see a comment, people are saying their stuff is old. It's interesting when you see people tend to renew apps quite frequently. Sometimes I almost think it's too frequently. But when you look at things like routers, it's very common to see a router in place for 5, 6, 7 years. And that becomes risky in terms of, does that old router have capacity? Plus, is there some security bug there that I have to upgrade as well? One of the nice parts about leasing infrastructure is the monkey is on the service provider's back to make sure that that infrastructure is, made state of the art, right? Yeah, we want infrastructure to be highly available, high performance, and cost effective. Well, sometimes those can run counter to each other, but those are some of the reasons people are looking at the leasing model there. When you're looking at software-defined networking, 62% using, the vast majority of the people are either using it or are in the plans of actively evaluating it, and they're putting it in either this year or at the latest next year. So that's largely people have been moving to that, and they see the value of it. Similarly for software-defined WAN, pretty similar remarks there. LAN, a little less so in terms of what the value is on software-defined LAN, but you are seeing a move to that as well, just a little bit slower than the WAN side. Infrastructure as code. People see the value of it. I think people are really not quite sure how to use it, and what the value is. I think people understand the fact that if I'm not writing code, uh, that it's quicker, but then, you know, it's more, am I writing code for the management of infrastructure as opposed to, I mean, people aren't really writing code for the routers themselves, right? Or the LAN switches themselves. It's more, the process for managing and updating, doing asset management and that type of thing. So people are starting to figure out how that ties in, but it's slower than the SD-WAN side of things. Now, when it comes to, again, people process, everybody's got teams that specialize in this kind of thing. For the most part, everybody's got use cases on that. Metrics and KPIs, they certainly have them. They certainly have governance on this stuff. Everybody's got a budget for the most part. Everybody has training. Now, when it comes to ops to take advantage of infrastructure, that's where, as you start to virtualize and you start to say, people are trying to figure out, if I have staff that is managing a network themselves, and now I give it to a software service provider, how much am I doing vendor management versus I'm managing it with them as a proxy versus I don't have staff doing that and I'm really going to a service provider. Those are some of the things people are trying to figure out on the operations side of things. But people certainly look at, now when they say you have a strategy for infrastructure, yes, they have them. But most of that, as I talk to people, seems to be more on how I'm doing the day-to-day incremental upgrades, as opposed to, for example, I've got a strategy on replacing my LAN with 5G wireless. People are not doing that. They're really more evaluating that. They don't have strategies for that, but they certainly have strategies for incrementally upgrading their routers, doing basic capacity planning to figure out what I need to do with my networking vendors in terms of adding incremental capacity to handle those types of things. Similarly for storage. So incremental growth, they're certainly doing it, but I don't see that they're necessarily doing it from a transformative standpoint on transformation technologies. Interesting to see here. People are kind of wondering who survives there, between Amazon, Google, and Azure. I think they all exist. They each have areas they play in. Certainly on the Azure side, they're getting people who are on the Office 365. They're getting a lot of people doing Active Directory, from doing it in their side to doing it in Azure, but they're not necessarily putting all of their eggs in the Azure basket. Amazon has a ton of people there. Google gets people, but I think they get a different class and different people than Amazon. So in my opinion, I don't think it's actually a case where one of those wins and the other two go away. I think they're going to be settling on the particular areas that they're strong in, and they'll continue to grow, and then they'll battle each other on the edges. Be interesting to see where 5G is there. You've seen the carriers pushing a lot into 5G, but I haven't seen enterprises figuring out really strongly how they're going to integrate that, say, into the LAN using 5G to replace Wi-Fi hotspots, for example. All right. So that's what we've seen in infrastructure and workplace technology. I'm happy to take anybody's questions if they have them. We'd love to talk to you in our Nemertes community. You can join that by simply going to www.nemertes.com/community. And you can ask to be invited to those communities. We really try not to have vendors in there. People who use technology are more than invited to come. You'll have people like myself and my peers. We'll be discussing with all of you that are in the community about a lot of these different technologies, how we're using, what the challenges are, what do you think about this vendor, that vendor, how are you dealing with this challenge? Those are the types of things you can see there. If you look here to the bottom right, we have different research pillars that you can be a member of: cybersecurity and ransomware, distributed workforce, digital transformation, enterprise automation, next generation infrastructure. These are the sort of the different areas that you can focus on being a member of. We will have our last presentation next Thursday at 11, where we're going to talk about trends in security and privacy. Certainly that's an area that was probably the most important to people, that we had the most participation in. So we're looking forward to sharing with you the details of what came up in interviews with people on security and privacy. And with that, I don't have any questions now, but if anybody has any, I will wait another minute to see if there's anybody interested in having any questions. I'm not seeing any questions at this point. So with that, I will thank you all for your attendance. I hope you found this interesting. And if you join the community, you can also get a copy of these presentations and findings as well. And with that, thank you very much for attending. And we look forward to seeing you at our next presentation. Have a great day, everyone.